Oh.
Appreciate you being out there. All right, 407-774-8255 is the number. We're rapidly moving through this hour of the show, and we'll, of course, be picking this stuff up on the other side. But I just want to make a couple of points, and then Carl's got some stuff also for his corner. There are two things that I see here, and with the Trump thing, because he's obviously not your average candidate. I think we can all agree on that. And I think that part of what you could perhaps characterize his campaign is as a phenomenon in the sense that it's not like your average campaign. And I think that Trump understands intrinsically what I've been saying on this show from its conception, and that is that politics is a lot like professional wrestling. You used the phrase a little while ago, don't mess with my guy, right?
Sure.
And we hear that a lot of times about all candidates, whoever your favorite candidate is. You know, people, that's when you go criticizing them, that's when they get their dander up and become very defensive. That's what works in professional wrestling, too, when the wrestlers can make that connection with an audience, such that when they get in the ring and do something dirty, their fans don't really care. They're fine with that as long as they beat the other guy who they consider to be dirtier, so to speak. So what Trump has done, and I think that this article reflects this when they say the goal isn't to convert Trump supporters into backing other candidates, but to dissuade them from voting altogether, is that Trump has made that connection. Now, I understand there's a lot of people out there that are loose, they're shopping around, but for a lot of people, he has made that connection already.
Yes.
And the damage that the Republicans may do is not just in the primary, but in the general election as well. Because if these numbers are true, that he's pulling, let's just say, 25% of the Republican vote, and 12% of them don't come back to vote either in the primary or the general election, they're doomed.
Yeah.
They can get all the Hispanic voters they want. And by the way, guess who the Democrats are struggling real hard to get, understanding that if they keep sliding with this demographic, that lo and behold, they won't be able to win national elections. Guess which demographic it happens to be?
Islamic terrorists?
Illegal Mexicans.
No.
Latinos.
It's actually white men.
Yeah, okay.
And white women now, too, only not as big. But they understand, as they go overboard the other way, they jeopardize that constituency. It's all a balancing network here. And when you dissuade and discourage people from voting because you so despise the candidate that they like, you're shooting yourself in the foot or in the butt or somewhere else, politically speaking. And real quick, and one last thing that I think that Trump has going for him, and that is that history is on his side, so to speak. These terrorist acts, the sour economy, all of this makes him look more and more like the solution. Because the terrorist attacks are occurring on the watch of Republican and Democrats alike. They all seem feckless and stupid and don't really know what to do about it, or they're telling us that they're going to do this and that, and we knowing intrinsically that that's probably going to be impossible, or who knows. Don't trust them. And Glenn Beck did a thing, I don't know, a week or so ago, where he was talking about if these three things occur, it will work. He said, if the economy gets worse, if terrorism gets worse, and if this domestic unrest gets worse, there's one person who will be able to best deal with those things. Guess who it was?
Well, he said there will be one person that the people, he's not for Trump at all.
Exactly.
But that people will perceive. He doesn't agree with that, though.
Exactly. That people would perceive that he would be the best for it. And Trump, and you're right, he's in no way a Trump fan. I mean, he ridicules him more than anybody.
Yeah.
And him and his guys. And by the way, they oftentimes get their facts wrong. When they talk about, for instance, his solution to ISIS, he's been talking about some of this stuff for years. And they're acting like he just now thought of it. But my point was that as things in the world get worse, he is going to look better and better. And the establishment types, the people who have been in politics, Hillary Clinton, are going to be looked at worse and worse too. In other words, less and less favorably. And if you think about it, history was on Barack Obama's side. History was on W's side. History was on Bill Clinton's side. In pretty much every election cycle, if you think about it, Reagan, history was on his side, was it not? What was a big deal going on while that campaign was going on? Something that we were counting every day. We were counting it every day. It got up to 444 days when it ended on the day that Reagan took office.
Yeah, the hostage crisis.
The hostage crisis. History was on Reagan's side. We cannot discount that. Not saying that it'll stay that way, but do you actually think that Obamerica and Obama's world is going to get better between now and next November, or worse?
Here's part of the effectiveness of Trump, and I see. Here's just so that I'm clear. I'm one of these people. I'm not convinced that Trump is a conservative at all.
Neither am I.
I think he's a liberal to moderate at best.
I'd say more libertarian, but go ahead.
But I think there's a couple of issues. Like for me, the border issue, I think he's great on. Will he be able to accomplish that stuff in office? I'm absolutely not convinced, because I am convinced that Donald Trump can be and is a great businessman. I think it will be a different story when he has to deal with the Congress, with the Senate and the House. I don't think it'll be the same Trump that people believe or that he's talking about on the stump. But here's his effectiveness. This is what you gotta love about the guy. He's a genius when it comes to campaigning. Because I've been meaning to write an article about this forever. Here's what Trump does. I will see a headline, and before I can even tweet on a headline, Trump is beating me to a tweet on that headline. And then Trump, his name alone is big. He beats me to the headline, and many other people to the headline, and he capitalizes on the headline. I'm not convinced that he necessarily believes it, and that's the problem. That even with speaking with a couple people today, they're convinced that Trump knows how to get to the headline. They're not convinced that he has core values, and so they're saying they're switching.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Did any of you happen to see his interview with Barbara Wawa on 2020 the other night? All right, you got to see a whole different side of Donald Trump, and you got a good meeting. You got a good chance to hear from his family, his present wife, and his 4 grown children, and got to see him a little bit with his youngest son, Barron 9, and I love the way his wife says Barron, and his grandchildren. Let me just say this. Donald Trump appreciates everything that America has made possible for him. First and foremost, he knows where his wealth came from, and he appreciates the American way. He appreciates also the fact that we are gone off way down the wrong path, and he wants to bring this country back to the right path. And he is willing to do whatever it takes to do that. Now, obviously, he's going to have roadblocks along the way. And certainly he will have to comply with the Constitution. He'll have to deal with a balky Congress. Doesn't matter which party's controlling it. They're going to hate the fact that he's president. And by the way, they would hate even more, they're talking about, if Cruz is president.
I totally agree. That's why I want Cruz. I think they'll hate it even more.
But yeah, I understand. But see, then we have to ask, who would be more effective with dealing with that particular situation? Because what they're going to have to do, and you said, the great campaigner, they're going to have to go over the head of Congress, they're going to have to go over the head of the media, they're going to have to go over the head of all their detractors to the public and sell the message to the public. Now, in terms of all his promises, in terms of immigration, if he just begins the process, that will be a huge step.
But that's exactly what Reagan did. Yes. Reagan went over the heads because he had to deal with a Democrat majority who hated him.
He also had to deal with...
O'Neill did not give in to him on anything.
And Bob Dole was a pain in his butt as much as, if not more than, Tip O'Neill, because he was of the same party and was fighting
him.
But let me show you guys some political skill and savvy, which I think will be more effective in Washington. and why Cruz, I believe, could get a lot more done in Washington than Trump. What is Trump's plan on the border besides the fence? What's the specific breakdown of the border? What's his plan? Even if you go online, what's his plan?
Well, the border is to be secured with the fence. Now, are you talking about immigration beyond that?
Yeah, I'm encompassing all in one.
The big door he's talking about.
Here's why I can appreciate Cruz. Because even though Donald Trump came with the border fence, Cruz has laid out a 3-part plan where anything Donald Trump says now, Cruz can say, that's already in my written plan.
Right, because Trump said he'll have a big door, and that people can go in and out of the door provided they do the paperwork.
But see, this is where I think we're getting lost in the weeds and missing the big point. People don't care if he has a specific plan. They just care whether he thinks he can do it or if he can do it.
Well, let's face it, politics, when you're campaigning, it's all about headlines. It's not about minutia.
Yeah, but see, what Trump is actually saying is very, what I think, substantive, and, if you will, makes to me much more sense, and that is that I don't know brick by brick how I'm going to build the doggone thing. I'm going to leave that up to people who build fences and walls. All I'm going to tell you is the doggone thing's going to be built. That's all you need to know. And at the end of the day, that's all the American public cares about. That's why he's so far ahead in the polls. You know, all these detailed plans aren't worth beans at the end of the day if the people aren't convinced that they can be implemented. And if they can't understand it, it doesn't do them any good either.
But this is where I would defer, because they do mean something to a lot of people. People like me that want to pick apart plans, and I look at Trump and I'm saying I don't believe him, and I know tons of people like me, and I'm sure it's just not anecdotal. Right. I think there's a lot of people out there like me that are like, no, you know what? This time we've been suckered by, we've heard people speak good games, and Trump is the best. But now I want a plan. I want it written down, and I want to see it. Well, I'm that person this time around.
I understand, but that's what we get all the time. We do.
No.
Why are we mad, for instance, at Congress?
No.
Because they promised us they were going to do X, Y, and Z, and instead they did A, B, and C.
Have they? Here's the one thing when it comes to campaigns, and this is something a politician taught me a long time ago. He said, Carl, and this was a politician, a person that worked in D.C. for a long time, and he said, this is how the system works. If you ever run into a politician running for any office and he doesn't give you a written plan, just know he's going to change it day one when he gets in. That's all you need to know. If you don't have a written goal before you get into office, trust me, you're going to be bombarded like no one's business, and I don't care how powerful you think you are, it changes on day one. Find me a person like Reagan, he said, that was espousing his views for decades before, and that man is not going to change his mind.
And the same with Gingrich, who came up with a plan for America, and he put it in writing, and he had to stick to it, and he stuck to it, and it worked. And this is the problem that we have with the Republicans. You say they promise X, Y, and Z, and they deliver A, B, and C. It's because they're gutless, and they will not put it in writing. And so when Obama says, I will veto that bill, they don't even bother to vote on it. They don't even put it up to the desk for him to veto it and turn around and say, there's the problem.
All right, we're going to have to pick this up on the other side. But in terms of who's been saying the same thing for literally decades now, Trump again.